Right, and we've done intros, so I'm going to just turn it over to John. I will say the more I looked at the engineering with nature and the projects that are ongoing around the United States, and some really cool ones here in Florida, the more excited I got. And I think that, you know, when you look at all of the pillars of engineering with nature, and one of the main ones being partnerships, the opportunity for engineering with nature projects to happen at the Kennedy Space Center, I think is it's over the moon. So John, take it away. We're really anxious to hear what you have to say.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. And you know, Laurilee invited me to this today because she thought it would be great for this group to participate in discussions that some of us are having right now concerning natural and nature-based solutions to some of our climate adaptability and water quality challenges at the Cape Complex of public lands and in the Indian River Lagoon. So thanks, Laurilee, for inviting me. I don't have a formal presentation, but I rather wanted to share with you some of my experiences with a particular program, the Army Corps of Engineers Engineering with Nature program. Also, why many of us think this program can add value to the issues that we're all confronting here in this landscape, and why the timing right now is great for a really big ask to help fund some of the big ticket projects that we think are necessary to truly help this landscape be resilient in the face of climate change, and for ways to help the space programs infrastructure, the biodiversity and the awesome recreational infrastructure be resilient in the face of climate change. And I do think there's a big role for this group potentially to play in that ask if you all are interested. And I was hoping we could kind of end our discussion today on strategizing, you know, how best to move forward together in a way to position ourselves in this landscape to be successful in such an ask for significant financial resources to apply to these challenges. So I thought, Laurilee, since kind of today partially is getting to know each other a little bit, I thought I would just introduce myself a bit and kind of how I became a fan of using natural and nature-based solutions to address and mitigate coastal risks that we have. And you know, my relationship with Laurilee goes back to when I first came to Florida in the late 1990s, and I came in as the ornithologist for Florida Audubon. I noticed we have some Audubon folks on the roundtable today. I'm a bird guy by training, and Laurilee was on our board of directors at the Florida Audubon Society at the time, and we built up a great relationship then and collaborated on several projects. And I treated that kind of like a postdoc, give it 2 or 3 years to see if I wanted to make Audubon a career, and it was an awesome platform. But I ended up after a couple of years going to work with the St. Johns River Water Management District. And I was there for 17 years of my career, and it was really a wonderful time. I worked in a variety of capacities, including overseeing the environmental sciences program, which had our Indian River Lagoon team as part of that. And wow, how lucky are we to have such a stellar group there. And some of you know Dr. Chuck Jacoby and Lori Miller and their team. And I had the privilege of working with them for many, many years on IRL issues. But about 6 years ago, I left the Water Management District to get back to my wildlife roots, and I went to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I've served in several capacities in the 6 years. Currently now the Deputy State Supervisor, but I wanted to share with you a 2-year stint that I had coordinating a partnership with the Department of Defense on Air Force installations in Florida. And that's where I encountered the Engineering with Nature program. And that's how I actually started working more in the Cape complex of public lands out at the Cape Canaveral, at the time Air Force Station, now Space Force Station. And right about a month after I started that coordinator role, we had a team of a few biologists working at Tyndall Air Force Base, helping manage the natural resources at Tyndall, the forestry resources, the listed species, both animals and plants. And about a month after I started, Hurricane Michael hit Tyndall. And you guys all know the story probably of Tyndall Air Force Base, but it pretty much got wiped out by Hurricane Michael, both a high wind event and the storm surge event as well, that pretty much destroyed that installation. And so I spent my first year in that partnership working with Tyndall and DoD on planning for a more resilient base after it was decided that the government was going to rebuild Tyndall at a cost of just under $5 billion. And DoD came to us and said, hey, what do we need to do to enhance our coastal resiliency? What kinds of things do you guys think would be worthwhile? And we were thrilled that they were including us in the discussion. We had an amazing canvas to work with at Tyndall. 18 miles of barrier islands, dune systems on the barrier islands, dune systems, relic dune systems on the mainland, lagoons behind the barrier islands, back bay waters behind the mainland, wetlands, just tremendous infrastructure to work with. And we started thinking, how can we use some of this natural infrastructure to enhance resiliency of the base, protect the mission, because the mission at Tyndall stopped, as you could imagine. After that storm, it stopped. It took a couple years just to get some initial mission back, and they're still 4 years later, still heavily involved in rebuilding the base. And we were asked to give a little presentation up in Savannah, Georgia, to a team of coastal resiliency planners for the military and for state wildlife agencies. And while there, we presented our Tyndall ideas, including some pretty innovative things like first lines of defense, second lines of defense, third lines of defense, using a lot of the natural infrastructure. And following our presentation was one done by Dr. Todd Bridges with the Army Corps of Engineers. And it was introducing and explaining the Engineering with Nature program that the Army Corps has. And I had never heard of it. This was in 2019 or so when we gave this presentation. And some of the things that we were thinking about for Tyndall aligned perfectly with Todd's Engineering with Nature concepts and program. So after that session, we invited Todd to come to Tyndall to help us plan for the future of a more resilient Tyndall Air Force Base. And I will say it was also a privilege working with Todd. It was inspiring working with Todd. He added tremendous value into helping pull together an assessment of risks, which the Corps is really good at their hurricane modeling and storm modeling. And we we worked with partners, stakeholders like you all, some engineering firms, and we developed a coastal resiliency master plan for the base of the future at Tyndall Air Force Base. And so far, it's just kind of been kicking off. The team has successfully secured about $20 million in work for resiliency efforts at Tyndall. It's just the start of a lot more work that needs to happen and that will be happening at Tyndall. So fast forward a little bit to Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, Space Force Station. So with the Air Force partnership that I was working with, we had 2 staff housed at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, helping them with their natural resource management. Mainly, we were focused on scrub jays, a little bit on beach mice, and on sea turtles. And their team is led by Mike Blaylock, who's the environmental chief for the program, and Angie Chambers is their wildlife chief. And they wanted to do some things different on beach mice. They wanted to stop the regular monitoring, and with the data never really got used, they wanted to do some real actions for recovery of the species. And so we got together with Angie and Mike and all the land managers out there. Kristen Kneifel, who's on the call, was receptive from the Canaveral National Seashore getting together. Mike Legary thought it was a great idea. Let's get together and redirect our beach mouse efforts. And NASA, Jeff Collins, Dan Dankert, James Brooks, and their environmental team were all supportive. So we got together and started thinking about how can we do more for beach mice recovery in the face of climate change and the growth of the space programs out there on that complex of public lands. And it became pretty clear to me that there was a lot of needs in the resiliency and climate adaptability world. NASA was pretty far along with the Refuge. They had built the big dune that was protecting Artemis that some of you are aware of. They had, the Refuge had levee stabilization work going on. So there was work both protecting some of the space infrastructure, of course, and some of the recreational opportunities in that landscape. The Space Force was kind of putting fires out where they were having erosion problems and just tackling them, reacting to them as they came up, and they were doing the best they could. And I know Kristen Kneifel at the National Seashore had some challenges as well on the resiliency front. And I was thinking, after my experience working with Todd at Tyndall, I was like, man, if we could get Todd and his program out here to the Cape and introduce him to this team of land managers and landowners and introduce them to the opportunities and the challenges, that might really add value to what we're all striving for in that landscape. It would add capacity because they have a lot of expertise. It would add credibility because of their involvement in projects actually all over the country and all over the world. It would add a really, as Laurilee mentioned, a collaborative approach, because the Engineering with Nature is really a super collaborative program, and I'm all about collaborations, and I love that strategy that they have when embarking on these large scale projects. And I thought they could help us kind of pull together a master plan potentially for this entire landscape out there that might have a good chance at getting real big time funding that is needed to address these challenges. So in other words, instead of piecemealing it from the different installations and landowners out there, I was thinking, our chances were better and the timing was great if we kind of pooled our thinking and moved together with a real big master plan that thought big and that took advantage of some of the opportunities we have with federal funding right now. So So that's just a little bit of background on how we ended up inviting Todd and Engineering with Nature to come to the Cape Complex and meet with all the federal land managers. And that's when I had lunch with Laurilee. It was a few weeks after that, Laurilee and I had lunch talking about a variety of issues. We were up in Ormond Beach. And I mentioned to her that we had just had Todd out to the Cape Canaveral complex. And Laurilee was really intrigued with that. She was bummed on one hand because you guys in Laurilee had the state resilience officer out looking at projects. Wes Brooks, who's an awesome guy, and I'm thrilled he's in that position, out in the lagoon. The same day we had Todd out at the Cape Complex. So unfortunately we missed getting Todd and Wes together. But the Space Force and NASA invited Todd to come out. They wanted to meet him. They wanted to learn about the program. Kristen was part of that at the National Seashore, and Mike Legary and the Refuge. So all were excited to meet Todd, and we had a great couple of days. We have parts of 3 days that we were together, and we looked at the challenges on the different installations. We looked at the Space Force challenges on the beach side and on the lagoon side. We did the same on NASA and Refuge property. And we even, Kristen, made it out to the National Seashore to look at some of the challenges you have there as well. So that was in early July. And here we are in mid-September. And there was positive energy from that interaction, positive energy to potentially pursue collaborative efforts with the Army Corps and their Engineering with Nature program. But we haven't followed up much yet on what the next steps are going forward. And this is where I think you all, could play a role and be helpful. And I think many of you know, and Laurilee and I talked about it, and Laurilee even sent a note like, God, we've got big projects and it's going to take a lot of money. How do we get there? It's clear that we've got oceanside issues to deal with to protect the space program in the long term, to protect our biodiversity in those dune systems. We also have lagoon side issues that we can deal with as well. And one of the things, and Dwayne and I have talked about it and others, one of the things I'm excited about is, so much of the burden on the Indian River Lagoon challenges has kind of fallen on local governments, state governments, water management districts. The feds, personally, from my standpoint, we haven't played much in that system. We haven't added as much value, I think, as we could. And the Cape is a huge footprint in the Indian River Lagoon system. It's a massive footprint. And frankly, some of the activities that have happened there have, had some pretty significant impacts to the natural systems. I think it is kind of a perfect time for us as a federal government to kind of come together and see, what we can do to really advance projects with co-benefits, multiple benefits, and recreation benefits, infrastructure protection, habitat benefits. And I think that the timing is right on many fronts with the challenges we're facing in the Indian River Lagoon. There are some big ticket projects out there. There are, still some large dredge holes remaining that are kind of ecological sinks in the fisheries world that are expensive to deal with. We have flow issues, many of you are aware of, with the Banana River being isolated, cut off by building the crawlerway. That is a huge challenge to address long term. And I don't even know if we can that one. We got the crawlerway being used right now. moving Artemis back in. I don't know if Artemis is back in the VAB, but you know, lots of big ticket items. We got the levee infrastructure that's so critical for impoundment management and recreation. These are all really expensive projects to tackle. And when Todd came out there, you know, after a couple days, and we got stuff on the National Seashore too that's really expensive, but Todd came out there and he's like, you know, pretty easily realized there's in the $100 million+ that are needed to you know, to really make this system as resilient as we can. It could be more than that. And to some people that might be pie in the sky thinking, but I don't. Looking at the scale of the projects being done in Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, that are billions of dollars of investment by the federal government to mitigate coastal risk. And with the current administration wanting us to make investments and providing significant federal funding to advance projects, I think that the timing is right. One of the challenges is we need local partners to tap into these federal sources of money. And some of these sources, just to throw out at you, that FEMA has a program that's called BRIC. It's called Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. That's really well funded right now. EPA, Dwayne is aware of this, has a lot of infrastructure money coming to them as well. The infrastructure bill has tremendous resources in it, and the Inflation Reduction Act is a big act to address climate adaptability. So figuring out how to tap into these resources is something that I think, you know, we can do, and this group could play a big role in. And I wanted to share one item with you all. It was an executive order that President Biden issued on Earth Day this year, back in April. And Lou can share the link, but I think I've got it here. So let me see if I can share this screen. And then I want to open it up for some discussion with you all. Let's see here. Let me know when you guys can see that, if you can see that.
We got it.
Yeah.
Okay, the title wouldn't lead you to think that there's a natural and nature-based solutions emphasis in this executive order. It's actually really well written. You guys might be interested in seeing all of it. It's about strengthening our forests, our communities, and local economies. And I want to steer you to Section 4 of the executive order. And I'm just pointing this out because I think, you know, there is the interest at the highest levels of government for some of the things we're talking about. So if I scroll down to Section 4, there are only 5 sections. So it's a short executive order. Okay, so Section 4 is, and I think I'd like to read this first paragraph to you, or we can read it. Section 4, deploying nature-based solutions to tackle climate change and enhance resilience. And they reference above, just as forest conservation, restoration, and adaptation generate broad benefits related to climate change in other areas, other nature-based solutions can advance multiple benefits. These solutions include actions that protect coasts and critical marine ecosystems, reduce flooding, moderate extreme heat, replenish groundwaters, capture and store carbon dioxide, conserve biodiversity, and improve the productivity of ag and forest lands. To ensure agencies pursue nature-based solutions to the extent consistent with applicable law and supported by science, the following actions will be taken. And it's really this first bullet here that I think we'll all continue reading it, because this tells the story. The chair of the Council of Environmental Quality, the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, these are in the White House, and the assistant to the president and national climate advisor shall, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Interior, Secretary of Ag, Secretary of Commerce, and then Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Energy, Homeland Security, EPA, the Small Business Association, and the heads of other agencies as appropriate. And here's the key here. In collaboration with all those different secretaries and leads, shall submit a report to the National Climate Task Force to identify key opportunities for greater deployment of nature-based solutions across the federal government, including through potential policy guidance and program changes. So they are to submit a report on opportunities for greater deployment of nature-based solutions across the federal government. To me, I can't think of a better place with higher stakes than we've got than the Cape Canaveral complex of public lands to deploy natural solutions to the challenges that we have. And so the question is, you know, how do we harness this momentum at high levels of government? In DoD is a wonderful leader in the climate adaptability arena. And by the way, they're one of the most relevant and impactful partners I've ever worked with on natural resource conservation has been DoD. And that can be a subject for another discussion, but really impressed with how they tackle challenges, mainly because they want to protect their mission. And to do so, they'll go to great lengths to manage natural resources in a way that they don't negatively impact the mission. But so how do we harness this interest at the highest levels of government? How do we tap in to these big funding streams that are coming right now and position ourselves at the Cape to really capitalize on this time that we have here? So, you know, I think, you know, the concept of a master plan for the whole Cape is something that's that interests me, especially the 4 different entities: the National Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife, NASA, and Space Force, all coming together to promote a resilient landscape there for all those co-benefits that can be achieved. And so the question is, you know, what do we need to do to really to pitch this and to come together? And so I'm curious what you guys think. I have some thoughts on what we can do together, but Laurilee, I'm thinking maybe we can open it up for some general discussion, and hopefully that background kind of set the stage for how I got involved and how Laurilee thought you guys could be helpful and would want to learn more about what we're thinking. But the Engineering with Nature is just in its very introductory stages of discussions in the Cape Complex. No projects have been done yet by the Army Corps out there, but the entities have done their own projects. NASA, the Refuge, the Space Force, and everything. But So I just wanted to eliminate some confusion there. We're at the infancy of this, but we need to strike at some point here. And I think a collaborative strategy coming together to make this pitch, I think could position us to get what we need to really secure things longer term. So just wondering if we can open it up for discussion. Anyone has questions or thoughts or feedback or?
This is Pete Eggert with Space Forward. I got a question or two.
Yeah, Pete.
Can you just, I'm not familiar with the Engineering with Nature program. Is that in with the Army Corps? And if you could just tell me a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, so Engineering with Nature is our official Army Corps program. The national lead is Dr. Todd Bridges out of the Erdek site in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Todd is kind of a global thought leader on natural and nature-based solutions to deal with climate uncertainty and climate risks, a lot in the coastal environment, but as well up in mountainous regions, river systems, and with wildfire and lots of things. I believe the program started in 2010, so it's a relatively young program, Pete. They are collaborating on projects all over the country and all over the world. They work through their districts, their Army Corps districts. Like we have the Jacksonville district that is responsible for this region in Puerto Rico. They work a lot with the Mobile district on projects in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and in the Mississippi region as well. So they are looked at as kind of thought leaders. They have a lot of technical expertise. They also write, from what I can tell, contribute to some of the language that ends up in federal legislation on, for example, the Water Resources Development Act, WRDA, and elsewhere. And so they don't have specific funding that that they have a pile of money that they can start applying to challenges, but they do work on building collaborative partnerships and then together going out and seeking that funding to apply to project implementation. So Todd is not an engineer, he's a biological scientist. He's actually the lead environmental scientist for the entire Army Corps of Engineers. He's their top environmental scientist, and he also happens to lead the Engineering with Nature program. And I think Laurilee or Lou had shared with this group some websites that have descriptions of some of the Engineering with Nature projects that are taken on. They're some of the same type projects that need to, that could be implemented out in the Cape Complex. So they do a lot of dune and beach enhancements. They also build dunes using different methodologies that are more environmentally friendly. They work on wetland restoration, berm constructions, hydrologic reconnections. They look at groundwater and water quality issues and trying to use natural infrastructure to improve those. So there's just a whole variety of different tools that they use. And their thinking, Todd's thinking, is that this landscape, the Cape Canaveral complex, for lack of, and Merritt Island kind of complex of lands, Todd feels like could be an amazing proving ground, so to speak, for some of these innovative methodologies to address all these different challenges that we have out there. So it is a formal program. It's not funded with a big line item to say, hey, go spend this where you need to, but they bring a lot of credibility. They have capacity and expertise to help, but we're going to have to work with them to find resources to apply to our challenges. And I don't know if that helped, Pete, but
Two quick comments. In the messages, we have a link to the Engineering with Nature, so anybody can go there and copy that. And maybe, John, you can stop sharing so that we have a little bit more. Yeah. Perfect.
No, I think it does answer my question, John, and I really wanted to know more about what type of entity they are, how that funding would flow, how they, I guess, get to the projects, from thinking about the projects to implementing the projects.
yeah, I mean, that's a great thought. And I'm thrilled to see Virginia on the call. I don't know, Virginia, when you jumped on, and Keith Ramos also jumped on. But, from what I can tell, a lot of these funds that are becoming available are not, federal entities are not eligible for them. They're earmarked or targeted to states and local governments. And oh, did we just lose Virginia? I just lost her on the screen. Oh, there she is.
She's there.
She's on video now.
Yeah, and that's talking about local governments. So I think if we move forward with some sort of big ask for large funds to tackle collaboratively some of these challenges, I think Brevard County and Virginia's program is going to be a key partner in this. And I haven't even talked to Virginia yet. And I apologize, Virginia, if we're surprising you today with this. But Pete, for us to be successful, we need local government, state government partners to be able to tap into this. And Virginia's program is just doing such awesome things in the system. And I personally have been yearning for more involvement of Virginia and her program in the federal landscape there, because I think we could do a lot more together, and we're going to need local partners if we're going to be successful tapping in to these funds that are available.
Hey, John, this is Dale Ketchum, also with Space Florida. Quick question for you this does sound really exciting, because it does seem to be a mechanism for exploiting the new funding sources that are all of a sudden available throughout the federal government to address these problems from whatever different agencies they might be coming. But how much did the state of Florida help? Because we're a state entity, and how much did that, were they engaged up at Tyndall? You might have said, and I missed it, but we're a state agency. So in the state, we also, as Space Florida, have distinct authorities out on the Cape, on both sides of the river there, Space Force and NASA. And I'm looking at how we can engage, and also how we can be a mechanism for getting industry involved, because there is going to be more growth out there. And how do we leverage that to get more than just the minimum required mitigation efforts as that new growth expands out there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Dale, two great points. I see tremendous potential for engaging the private sector out there, private industry, because they have big risk, and I think they're going to want to mitigate that risk too going forward. So I think that's part of the partnership package we could pull together, and it's the extraordinary things the private sector is doing there with the space program. As far as the state, I think that's a great question. They were an awesome partner at Tyndall, and several components of the state Fish and Wildlife Commission, the state DEP through their coastal resilience program played a role. And I will say that I've chatted, and Laurilee had Wes Brooks out there recently, and I've talked to Wes about this concept of some big picture stuff in a Cape landscape. And Wes is a smart guy. He understands how important these federal lands and federal programs are to the local economy, to recreation, for quality of life for people in the area. But his funding, which is significant, Wes has a large amount of money. The governor and the legislature starting to appropriate. We're kind of playing catch up. I want to say it was $600 million in this current cycle. It's going to be billion, and I think it's going to keep growing. Wes is excited that we're having these discussions, but for Wes to play a role, he needs to work with local governments like Virginia's and others as a conduit for funding. He's excited. The federal government's not eligible, but he can work with local communities, and he sees the value in what we're thinking about here in this landscape. So at the higher levels of state government in the resiliency area, I think we will get support and to figure out how to use the authorities and proper channels to come together in an effective manner. So I think the state will play a significant role to help us move this forward. And Laurilee's already had great discussions with Wes as well. So we just need to fold all that into some sort of strategic ask. Virginia, go ahead. Was that you, Laurilee?
Go ahead, Virginia. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I was just gonna, in the past, when we've had conversations about trying to, work collaboratively on the federal lands, one of the hurdles is that we have trouble getting access or, access for our contractors to just go do stuff, right? So they need to be federal contractors, but then how do we pay for federal contractors? So the one thing that sounded most promising to me in past discussions was that the Army Corps was already authorized to do work on the federal lands. And so maybe we could partner or pay the Army Corps. So does anybody have thoughts on how that would or wouldn't work?
I do, Virginia. We've done multiple projects, including infrastructure projects on KSC and the Space Force side. And we do not necessarily need to use, we absolutely don't have to use federal contractors for our projects. And all of our, I won't say all of our funding, but most of our funding comes from a particular grant source, whether it's FDOT or others. One large example is the infra grant for the Indian River Bridge, the $90 million that actually is flowing to Florida Department of Transportation through the Federal Highways Administration. And anyway, we have multiple examples, even down to, which it's not minor, but it's maybe even a $10 million project where we contract with local contractors to do the work. We can reach to folks that either KSC or Space Force use, but what it comes down to for us to get those workers out there is usually some sort of property agreement or an easement or other legal sort of document that allows our access. And then once we get that, we can badge just about anybody to go out and do the work.
But in that case, you are the grant recipient or the funding recipient. And what I'm hearing from Gian is that both these federal funds and the state funds need a local government sponsor. So the money would come to us. How would we get the money to your contractors? Or
Yeah,
it might work in reverse. It might come to us and then flow to you.
So states eligible and local governments are eligible. It's just federal entities. And another option is, which we do a lot, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the State Fish and Wildlife Commission have authority through a federal act called the Sykes Act that they can pay for projects on DoD lands. DoD is really guarded about any influence or use of money. They don't know how to accept money, by the way. They have a hard time accepting any money. They have a lot of it, obviously, but they have worked with us for us to receive money. And if it's a project that's identified in their INRAMP, their Integrated Natural Resource Management Plan, we can work with DoD, that installation, and use fish and wildlife funds to get projects done. And we do that all over, and the state has that ability. And of course, the Refuge and NASA have a super tight relationship, and the National Park Service is within the Department of Interior. So, I mean, it'll be interesting, Virginia. You're definitely pointing out some mechanisms that could be challenging, but I think, you know, we can figure out creative ways, and I think we have the authorities to figure out creative ways if the landowning entities and land managers, and that's the Park Service, the Refuge System, NASA, and Space Force, if they're in, if they want to play and they want to come together, I think we can find ways to work with local governments and the state to kind of make the funding a possibility. We just have to get creative and innovate on, but having Space Florida there is awesome. I think that provides a vehicle as well from the local government standpoint.
So the city of Titusville could actually be a participant. I mean, they don't have any matching money, but they could apply for a grant.
Yeah, I think there's, you know, if we start getting down to specifics, I think the cities, the counties, and the state are going to be the ones driving, you know, the potential securing of funds. So, you know, I know there's a lot of different entities that could play a role, but I'm thrilled that just Virginia's, I could see her wheels turning and starting to think about how they might be able to add value and take a more active role in that landscape when, you know, they haven't really been able to in the past. And I think this is the type of subject that lends itself to a real collaborative approach to moving forward.
So what do you think would be the first step? Do we identify the entity that's going to ask for the money, which probably would be Brevard County? How can we, you know, as individuals, is there anything we can do?
And I see Dwayne has his hand up, and I want to get to Dwayne, but one thought I've got, and Dwayne will have some thoughts too, but what I think, if there's interest from this group and from Virginia and from, of course, the federal land managers, we have Keith Ramos on from, he's the new complex manager out at the Merritt Island complex of refuges. And if we get NASA and Space Force and Kristen's group at the National Seashore, which those federal entities are interested in working collaboratively with engineering with nature. But what we haven't talked about is path forward. And I think, Laurilee, one thing we could do, if this group thinks is a good idea, and I'm going to look to Virginia and Dwayne and Keith and others, is I think we could set up a workshop for us, give it a day or two, that we just get together and hammer out a strategy, hammer out an outline for what our ask would be. If we could do that, have stakeholders, private industry, through, you know, the space programs, local government, state government, federal government, if we can all get together and kind of hammer out an outline on how we're going to make an ask to do significant coastal resiliency and natural systems resiliency in the Cape landscape, I think we could come up with a plan on going forward. So that's just one idea. Dwayne, you had your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. It's one that I've been engaged with now for a couple of years. Here's how I see this moving forward. And it really has to start at the federal level. So if you look at engineering with nature and the evolution of that as a principle, guiding principle with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to my knowledge, that principle has not, how do I say it, transitioned into a strategic planning principle within the other agencies. Even though, you know, we have administrative authority through the executive order and language within the Bipartisan Infrastructure and Investment Act, that if I ask the question, you know, has NASA as an agency adopted engineering with nature as a principle? Has DOD adopted engineering with nature as a principle? You know where I'm going with that. If in fact that hasn't happened at the highest level, then I see a lot of difficulty kind of jumping into, you know, let's go find money for a project. Because in many cases, the dollars that are flowing, and there's no question, Jean's right, there's a lot of money flowing, but that money is flowing through already authorized channels and agencies. And I'll give you a really good real example. The National Estuary Program just put a proposal into NOAA with like 30 individual partners, 16 different teams, trying to secure $14 million for habitat restoration projects. Those aren't guaranteed. It's competitive. But there was a clear path for those dollars through NOAA, first authorized, then appropriated, you know, then available through competitive grants. And so I do think, you know, as this moves forward, this discussion at the highest level at the federal agencies is going to be absolutely important, because of a lot of those dollars, you know, we know there's a lot of money flowing through the Army Corps of Engineers, but their authority to do some of this work related to the lagoon is not the same kinds of authorities as like Pete was talking about with the bridge, you know, and what I would call security, you know, essential transportation corridors to serve the mission of NASA at Kennedy Space Center. So I think we have to have this conversation. I think it's really important. I think Gian is right. The timing is of the essence. These large dollars are only going to be available for 5 years. There's no guarantee that they are going to go beyond the bills just recently passed. And so time is of the essence if in fact we're going to position for federal dollars, you know, with local state participation. But it's an exciting time to have this conversation, and a conversation that needs to happen. One last thing, one project that will be coming up, at least in concept by the end of January, will be the possibility of looking at options for a new wastewater treatment plant to serve Space Force. And if you look at wastewater treatment plants, that project easily could go $150 million or more. You know, if you pull that infrastructure off the Barrow Island, put it on the mainland, consolidate with multiple partners. And so I'm expecting to see some opportunities that will happen that are already kind of in the pipeline on planning. And then one last comment, I'm in conversations with Angela Dunn at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. She's the Chief Planning and Policy Division to try to look at how do we get the rest of the Indian River Lagoon, the things that aren't directly related to KSC, more in line with WRDA funding. So, and that's a heavy lift, and we'll see where that goes in our November meetings. But it's a process that Virginia Barker and Brevard County have already initiated as it relates to water flow issues and infrastructure at Kennedy Space Center. So lots of moving parts, I guess. And I think this has to start with leadership, at CANA, at NASA, at Space Force, without those agencies adopting kind of the principle, then I don't see this happening at the project level, project by project.
John, a couple of quick
and
questions.
Lou,
Yeah.
I just I lost power totally at the house, so I just caught the last like 2 minutes of Dwayne, and I stepped outside to take it on the phone, and I just called in. So unfortunately, I missed a bunch of that. But go ahead, I'm here on the phone.
Well, and we've got it recorded so we can share that back with you.
Great.
The two questions that I had are, you mentioned a report, is there anything about timing and focus that may be relevant for our discussion? And the other one is, what suggestion, whether it's for the roundtable or some other organization, do you have in trying to go ahead and begin to catalyze the workshop you talked about? So report and workshop.
Yeah, good questions. The report that I was referring to was in the executive order from President Biden, and I need to look into that because that would be, the great location to place this landscape on their map in front of their eyes as a federal landscape where they can deploy natural and nature-based solutions to address climate adaptability. So I'm not sure when that report is due to the president, but it's spelled out in that executive order. So we can look into that, and I will look into that. And I can work with Dwayne on that as well. The second, you asked about the workshop, and I threw that out just because I think we need to capture the momentum that we've got right now and the time as well. And I think a workshop could be a way to kind of to move this forward. But before we did a workshop, as Dwayne said, I would want to make sure all the federal players are on board and in alignment with moving forward collaboratively with such with the type of kind of ask, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I'd want to make sure we have the support of our local government partners, be it the state or Virginia's team at Brevard County. So I think with a little bit of legwork, we can see if everybody's aligned, and if we get the green light, if everything looks good, then I think we schedule a workshop and come up with an agenda and a strategy, and see if we can outline a path forward to really think big instead of doing this project by project. Really think big and try and secure significant resources to tackle these. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, Lou.
John, I wonder if I could ask just one question.
Sure.
I think a plan is necessary, and that's what would come out of the workshop. Who led the effort at Tyndall?
Good question. Tyndall, when we started it, it was interesting. It was led. There were two DoD entities at Tyndall. There was the 325th Fighter Wing, which kind of owned and managed the base, and then there was what was called the project management team that came in to rebuild the base. So you had kind of two hierarchies of DoD entities involved there. The team that led the coastal resiliency effort was the project management office of DoD, and they had to work closely with the 325th Fighter Wing, and we at the Fish and Wildlife Service were kind of a major player in that effort. The Army Corps was a major player, and we really benefited because we had an engineering firm that the project management office had called Jacobs Engineering. They had a contract with Jacobs Engineering, and they were able to steer some funding to Jacobs to kind of do the background work to pull together a coastal resiliency master plan. But that master plan was written by Jacobs in collaboration with Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps, Nature Conservancy played a role, and of course DoD. So it's a kind of long answer, but yes, there was a lead, and it was DoD's project management office. So that's it. That's a good point on how we go forward. And
Well, you have an interesting analogy. If you look at NASA and the Space Force, they're the two entities like your two at Tyndall. And Jacobs happens to be a major engineering firm at NASA Kennedy. So there might be some opportunities there as well.
yeah, interesting. And who's this? I'm sorry, I can't see. Is this Al?
Yeah, it's me. Yeah. Al.
Hey, Al, I'm just on the phone. I can't see any screens, and I'm just outside. But no, that's a great thought. Jacobs Engineering had, when first talking about this, they were like, "Hey, keep us in mind if you guys get anything going at the Cape in a collaborative way." So that's good to know that they're out there and a potential option.
This Charlie Ditto just might be worth noting. I know that Jacob's contract is up for bid, and I'm not sure who's going to get that contract, but it should be known very soon.
I have a
Interesting.
question.
Well, yes.
This is Dave Bato with Roundtable. What I've heard so far is really great. Words of collaboration and time urgency are words we've been preaching for quite a while now. And the good projects with engineering with nature, I think, are necessary to reduce the impact of the built environment at the Cape. Problem I'm seeing that hasn't been addressed today is the fact that there is harmful development ongoing at the Cape as we speak by the commercial area. We have been trying to get an adoption of a low impact development concept out there, but have not succeeded. Most of the answers we get are complying with state requirements. We know that state requirements are not effective as they stand. We can look at the lagoon and know that. They're undermanned and underfunded. The adoption of low impact development for the commercial development that's ongoing, we believe is necessary and essential. You mentioned DoD being awesome in their approach to resiliency. One of the things they have done, DoD has declared that all development on all DoD installations in the U.S. or overseas will use the concept of low impact development. That instruction is a detailed instruction. It includes a detailed engineering manual for doing low impact development. It's very well done, and they have instituted it worldwide on all their installations. We believe that perhaps in this collaboration, and I think that's a wonderful word, NASA and Space Force could get together and establish LID right away. There's no big money needed. In fact, it usually reduces costs of development. What can we do about an early workshop of just maybe a few of these stakeholders to establish LID throughout the Cape, both Space Florida, both the space station, they have adopted it. I believe the DOD requirement is any development or redevelopment that exceeds 5,000 square feet total, that means construction and open space, must apply low impact development concepts. Have we got any plan to establish that kind of collaboration?
This is John. I think that's a great point. That's a challenging issue. I think an extremely valid one. But you know, with the growth of the industry, with the private players there and their kind of demands on the system, so to speak, you know, DOD is an owner, lessor. They lease space, and you know, they have the ability to influence, you know, how much space is leased and what the development looks like. But the asks are coming pretty big from private industry. I think Space Florida knows it and others. So I think it's a great point. You know, there's regulatory processes in place to minimize impacts, but you know, they're not going to solve all our problems through regulation. We know that. It'll help. But I think it's fair game to talk about. It wasn't something that I was particularly thinking about for our coastal resiliency efforts, but it's a very legitimate point. DOD is a champion of low impact development that's resilient, sustainable. So, you know, I think there are ways we could, you know, try to influence that. But, you know, the one thing with DOD that I've learned, it's kind of interesting. You know, you have the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon. That's where our natural resources team is housed, at the Pentagon for DOD. And they have a lot of ideas, and they push out down to the installations, strategies. But it's the installations that have all the power and control. I was always surprised about that. I thought if the Secretary's office said something, you know, it would happen. But actually, it's the commanders at the installation levels that have a lot of say and power in what happens on military installations. So not that adds anything to our discussion. I just wanted to explain my experience there. Even though there's high level strategies, the installation has to want to do it for it to become reality. So there's tension there between installations and the Pentagon on control of their land that they're using for mission training. I think it's a great point. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts. I don't know if it's something that we combine with this. I'm thinking it's a separate kind of issue that you know, we can, you know, this group can chime in and be heard and see what happens. But that's my take.
I believe you, and I think that one of the things to consider is that low impact development reduces the need for large applications of money to correct problems done in the past. These are problems that are being done now, and we can stop them from being done and don't have to spend all that money in the future. Thank you.
Good point.
Any other questions before we wrap this up?
I don't see anybody jumping up and down. I can't thank you guys enough for taking your time to join us today. I know it's a stressful day. And I'm looking at the new report from the Hurricane Center, and it doesn't look good for us. So in fact, a lot has changed. So we need to pay attention to what's coming with the storm. Good luck to everybody. Thank you again. Thank you very much. And if you need a home for the workshop, I would be glad to host it at Dixie Crossroads. Shrimp is good bait. That might help bring in some of the other players that we want to attract. But
Yeah.
y'all take care today, and thank you very much.
Hey, Lou, before you close, I feel like the door's kind of been open, but there's no next step.
Correct.
And-
Yep.
And, I hate to put it on Gian, going back
Yeah.
to, I think, a number of the comments we all had about, getting the right federal leadership. Seems like that's the next step. But
Yep.
I just want to, Gian, we would be available from the NEP. We do have a number of players that we're communicating with on a regular basis. We got a November meeting, and so I'm willing to bring this in front of my board, because we're going to be talking about U.S. Army Corps of Engineers
Right.
anyway, and just get my board to at least make a statement if they're willing, and I think they would be, that we need to move forward with this collaboration at the federal level as we move forward. So I don't want to put any work on anybody else here, but I'm willing to do that with my board in the November meeting. So at least the NEP is on record that, we'd like to see a federal discussion move forward, about, collaborating and trying to secure additional funds, through that collaboration, with engineering with nature principles and LID principles. I mean, all of that's in our comprehensive management plan anyway. None of this is
Right.
new to the NEP, but moving it forward, I think it's going to take some actions, at the federal level that, to be honest, most of us don't control. I can't control leadership at NASA, and I think it's going to take some top-down leadership on principle to make this happen. So anyway, we'll do what we can on our end.
What's the date of that
Well-
meeting?
I think it's November 2nd or 3rd week in November. And I am going to be bringing up whether or not my board wants the NEP to initiate it's called a Section 729, a Section 7001 request to try to get the whole Indian River Lagoon kind of lined up for a watershed study that would then open up opportunities for funding through WRDA. Because the challenge is if you don't have a vehicle, so if you don't have authorization, then you can't get appropriation. And right now, if you wanted a project through the Army Corps as part of WRDA, you've got really just one major option that's in play, and that's Everglades restoration, and the IRL South portion of SERP. So that's already authorized, already appropriated, moving forward for the southern end. And then Virginia Barker and Brevard County kind of open up the window at Kennedy Space Center this year. There is a line item now in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report to Congress identifying the potential for projects related to water flow at KSC. But, it's still a long way from actually having a project identified and then, getting that project then funded through an appropriation. So it's a long road in WRDA. But for the rest of the lagoon, there is no authorization. There's no way for us to get funding through that process. And that's the challenge that Gian has at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There isn't an authorization for this kind of work through U.S. Fish and Wildlife that's going to bring the kind of dollars that we're talking about. But, a collaboration between DOD, U.S., Fish and Wildlife Service, CANA, that could get us there if the 4 federal agencies, had a common vision and then leadership that makes that vision, part of the mission. And it really is a top-down directive. Even, Visit Florida, and Pete, you guys don't make those decisions for the agencies. You're there as a support service. And so those of us who work in that support realm, like the NEP, we can make some requests and recommendations, but we don't control a decision point. That's got to happen within the agency. So we'll do our part, because I do think this has to happen at some point. Otherwise, we will see incremental growth like we do throughout the state of Florida, project by project. And you won't get the benefits of having a, what we used to call in the old days at DRI, development of regional impact, a big view of where you're going to be, 10, 12, 15 years down the road. You'll just see it project by project, permit by permit, and that has not worked well for the state of Florida in the long haul. So anyway, I just wanted to, before we ended kind of with an open end, I wanted to let you know that, we'll go ahead and bring this up to my board and see if I can get some direction from my board and support. And then Gian, you and I are talking on a regular basis. So we'll keep talking to you guys at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to see if we can make something to happen.
Well, Dwayne I was gonna offer, to try and check back and get that alignment that we need from the federal entities and local governments, and then report back to this group. If we're able to all get an alignment and think it's worthwhile, and then I could report back and we could schedule a workshop, but we need to do that first. And I'm up for doing that and definitely want to be a catalyst there. So, and I will also look into that report timing that is associated with the executive order. But I think, Lou, that's a logical path forward that Dwayne just kind of outlined, and I could take some first steps and work with folks to see if this continues to get traction and if a workshop would be welcomed by those entities.
And Gian, I think you're right, that executive, we need to find out where that report is. I'm talking to headquarters at EPA and Region 4 on a regular basis and not heard word one about that report. And it's not a surprise, if I'm not in the loop on everything, but usually I'll hear, if there's a large report moving forward. So I'll go ahead and reach out to my counterparts at EPA and see where they are as it relates to the executive order in that report.
And I'll just offer that certainly we're glad to continue to facilitate in communications. So please, reach out to Laurilee, me, and whether it's John or whether it's Dwayne or anybody else, let's keep the conversation going.